Awesome. All right. So, pew pew. Hey, it's somebody here. See, it does not take long for me to get on a tangent, right? So the chat is really effective. So welcome everyone. So glad you're all here. All right. So where we're going to pick up is where we left off, which is on page 113. And we're in the chapter 2 Wives. And what we're doing is we're seeking a new experience. What we want to do is have this new experience with this chapter and a new experience with the directions in this chapter, because there's so much that applies that I didn't think applied, not for me, despite being definitely an alcoholic and despite definitely being an untreated codependent. I'm like, no, this chapter isn't for me. So what we're going to do is we're going to have an open mind and we're going to seek a new experience. And what we read, just to kind of give a brief recap or brief summary of what we've done so far, is we looked at the 4 different types of drinkers. Now, drinker number 1, he was probably a heavy drinker, might have some early signs of maybe not having the most control, but drinker number 1 doesn't have a problem, doesn't think he has a problem, not open to a solution, really closed off. And so we were given 6 principles of success for working with somebody like that. Now, the first principle of success is never be angry. That's a tall order, and I need a rigorous application of the 12 steps to not lose my temper on people. The second is to never tell them what they must do, so not trying to control and manage. That doesn't mean we can't set boundaries. Then it talks about how I need to maintain healthy relationships with those around me. Don't isolate. Then it says, principle 4, let go of the outcome. I'm not trying to control and change. Don't set your heart on reforming your husband. The 5th principle is to give that person the dignity of their own experience. And number 6 is go help someone. Go work these 12 steps, even if I'm not, in quotes, I'm not the one with the problem. If I work these steps, I can go help somebody just like me. Those are the 6 principles of success for number 1. And then when we looked at husband number 2, now husband number 2, he shows definite signs of alcoholism. And if you're wondering, what are those definite signs of alcoholism, or drinker number 2, those definite signs of alcoholism is lack of control and lack of choice. Once this person starts to drink, they're showing this definite lack of control. And then they've tried these different ways to moderate this, tried a number of ways to, I'm only going to have 3, or I'm just going to drink with friends, or I'm going to have water in between drinks, or, all those things that we try. And that's not working. And then is that person, number 2, drinker number 2, is also showing some signs where they're not able to stay sober. They want to stay sober, but they're relapsing. And they want to stay sober, but they're relapsing. See, lack of control and lack of choice, that is alcoholism. That is the illness that we're talking about here in this book, Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, husband or drinker number 3, I get stuck in saying husband, but that's not a helpful perspective. Drinker number 3 has gone a lot further. So they have a lack of control and lack of choice. We're seeing that they swear off and say, I'm never going to do it again. But more and more consequences have become true in their life. And so when we pick up on page 113, we're going to look at middle paragraph, second full paragraph, if you have a number 3 husband. So this is somebody who's definitely an alcoholic, who has tried to stay sober, who has maybe started to go to rehabs, go to detoxes, and they're not able to do it. And so they know they have a problem. It's clear they have this illness, and they're trying on their own power to do something about it. So they might be open to a solution. So if you have a number 3 husband, you may be in luck. You may be in luck. If you weren't here for the other 2 drinkers, I mean, drinker number 1 is like, ooh, difficult to deal with. Number 2, a little tricky. Number 3, oh, good news, right? Number 3, way more hopeless than number 2. That's good news. And what do I know from my own experience? The more hopeless I am, the better. And that's a weird paradox, because nowhere else is The more hopeless I am, the better. And the more aware of my hopelessness, the better. That's not my experience. But here it is. Here it is, because the more hopeless I am and the more awareness of the reality of the hopelessness of my illness, the more likely I'm going to do this stuff. Follow the directions out of this book, the stuff that I absolutely do not want to do. It's from that place of hopelessness that I'll accept that hope. So number 3, you might be in luck. Things are looking good because things are looking bad, right? And so for those that just joined, we're on page 113, middle paragraph. I've literally only made it a sentence into the Big Book study. So I'm glad you're here. You didn't miss much. So being certain he wants to stop. You can go to him with this volume, this book, as joyfully as though you had struck oil. We have a solution. And again, how do I access the solution? I'm going to them, not with a meeting list, and I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with meetings, but go to them with this book, the directions on how to get well and have that spiritual awakening, have that spiritual experience. And it says, he may not share your enthusiasm. Fair enough. Fair enough. There are times I sit down with sponsees and I'm like, let's do inventory. Woo! And you might be like, you don't actually do, yes, let's do inventory. Woo! And weirdly enough, they don't share my enthusiasm. They're not like, woo, ready to rock and roll on those columns. Weird. And that's okay. That's okay. But every time I see that word enthusiasm, I'm reminded that word, its origin is in Greek. And enthusiasm, it means to be filled with God's Spirit. And it's one of those things, I don't know about you guys, but some of my favorite speakers that I've listened to are those that you describe as like enthusiastic, because there's something about it that's contagious. When people who have this thing and they're lit up and they're happy and you can just see that joy, man, I want what they have. I'm willing to do what they do. There's times people will be like, I'm happy and joyous and free. And it's like, girl, take a face. We got a solution. And it's okay if you're struggling and you're not feeling that happy, joyous, and free. What I want you to know is, in my experience, it does not take long to get well. Anywho, he may not share your enthusiasm, but he is practically sure to read the book. And he may go for the program at once. If he does not, you will probably not have long to wait. Again, you should not crowd him. And that's one of the real themes that we see throughout, kind of working with others in the chapter, working with others. But regardless of the type of drinker, don't try to force the solution. Because I don't know about you guys, but as soon as somebody tells me I have to, immediately I'm like, don't tell me what to do. And I go and try to do the opposite. Like, there's something about that. So we're not going to crowd them. We're not going to force them. But we're going to say, hey, there's a solution here. And if you want it, you can have it. And it says, let him decide for himself. See, that's also one of the principles. On page 30, it talks about step 1. And it talks about how I need to fully concede to my innermost self. I am the one that needs to be convinced of my illness. I don't need to convince you or my sponsor or the treatment center or a counselor or a partner or a spouse or my family. I'm the one that needs to be convinced. So I need to give people, again, the dignity of their own experience, but also the information, the accurate information, a message of depth and weight, so that they can make that decision for themselves. And then it says, cheerfully see him through more sprees. And when we read that line in meetings, I know there's I don't like that. But I get it. I absolutely get, like, cheerfully see him through more sprees. Absolutely not. F off. Don't tell me what to do, right? But one of the things that I want to point out is, for an alcoholic or for an addict or for whatever brings you to this study today, step 1 is not, I am never going to pick up again. Step 1 is that a relapse is inevitable. That's what step 1 is. I will do it again. No matter how much I don't want to, no matter how much I need to stay sober, the desperate desire to stop is of absolutely no avail. So there will be more sprees. If I do not have a spiritual experience, there will be more sprees. It's a cycle. I will drink again. I will pick up again. I will go through this again. And then when it says cheerfully see him through more sprees, keep in mind, the suggestion that I made is in the title, cross out the word wives and write to those who stay, to those who are bound to the alcoholic. In fact, as bound to the alcoholic as the alcoholic is to alcohol, to the untreated Al-Anon, to the unhealed codependent. See, the reality is there will be more sprees. And just like the alcoholic is powerless from taking that first drink unless they have a spiritual experience, the reality is we're going to stay. The chapter is referring to those who stay. So as the alcoholic goes through more sprees, I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving knowing that I maybe should. I'm not leaving knowing that it's not working. I'm as bound to them as the alcoholic. So there will be more sprees. And I will be stuck there unless I have my own spiritual experience, just in my experience. And so that's what that line is referring to. There will be. And when it talks about cheerfully, why do we have to be cheerful? Well, you don't have to. I won't tell you what to do. But the cheer is those sprees might prove to be that thing that convinces us of our powerlessness. Like, so myself as an alcoholic, it's only seeing the hopelessness of my dilemma. It's only trying all those other things that I think will work and them not working, right? The more I go through this cycle, the more hopeless I am. But now we have a solution. So we can see that progression of alcoholism for the first time as a positive thing. And so it says, talk about his condition or this book only when he raises the issue. In some cases, it may be better to let someone outside the family present the book. They can urge action without arousing hostility. And that's what it talks about on page 90 and 91 in working with others, where it's often better to try to approach a new person, a new prospect, through a doctor or psychiatrist, or in our case, through a meeting, right? I tend to have my walls up with family more than anyone else. So, and especially somebody who's had experience with this illness and who has had experience with this recovery. See, when I'm armed with facts about myself, I can generally win the confidence of someone who has suffered like me in a few hours, right? So those are probably, I can say, yeah, I did that. Let's do some inventory, right? I can tell my sponsees, let's do some inventory. I can't do that with my mom. My mom is less open to my suggestions of inventory. Actually, I don't try to bring that up with my mom. I know better. I listen to two wives. She's not an alcoholic. In fact, I don't even think she needs Al-Anon. It's just me teasing. So, all right. So now what we get into are the descriptions of how we help and how we work with the fourth type of drinker, the type 4. And type 4 is utterly hopeless. Type 4 is in some of those last stages where really death is often near, in and out of rehab, in and out of detox, in and out of jail. And I'm talking about those places because we don't really have asylums anymore. So in and out, am I one of those people who has been in and out of rehab again and again and again? Am I one of those people who has tried everything? Do I have some of the physical symptoms of withdrawal? Am I experiencing delirium tremens? Am I somebody who, to get sober, I physically need to go to the hospital to get a taper of medication so that I'm able to detox safely? I might be that fourth type of drinker. And it says, you would suppose that men in the fourth classification would be quite hopeless. And see, one of the themes in this book is the hopelessness and then the hope. We drill down on the hopelessness to offer the hope. And to look at somebody who's been in and out of rehab 10, 15, 20 times, maybe in and out of AA or CA or DAA, in and out of fellowship again and again and again. It says you may think that person would be quite hopeless. But that is not so. Hopeless than hope. That is not so. Many of Alcoholics Anonymous were like that. Everybody had given them up. Defeat seemed certain. And see, if I'm coming to this study today and that sounds like me. That sounds like what I'm going through. What I want you to know is there is hope. And it's these 12 steps taken out of this book to have a spiritual experience. Because it says, yet often such men had spectacular and powerful recoveries. See, when I'm able to see the defeat, I'm able to then grab a hold of these steps that I don't want to do and have a powerful recovery. And I want you to know I'm big on this, like not selling the power of God short, or your higher power short, or these steps short, not selling this power short. Because I didn't once sell the power of alcohol short, not once in my life. Not once in my life did I sell that power short. And so if I've not had an experience that I would describe as spectacular and powerful, that's okay. I couldn't stay well on one drink. I can't stay well on one experience. So if we keep seeking, we'll keep finding, and it will happen. And it does say there are exceptions. Top of 114. Some men have been so badly impaired by alcohol, they cannot stop. Sometimes there are cases where alcoholism is complicated by other disorders. A good doctor or psychiatrist can tell you whether these complications are serious. And it says, in any event, try to have your husband read this book. And one of the things I just kind of want to tie this in, and for those who have been coming for me going through 2 wives, we bounce around. This is a bouncy chapter. Let's pop over to page 58 for a second. So, because we don't read 114 in meetings too often, but we do read 58 in meetings a whole lot. And on page 58, it talks about rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path, right? And it says those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. And I don't know about you, but almost myself and almost every single person that I've worked with, when we get to that page 58 in the book, it's every single time. Paige, do you think I'm one of those constitutionally incapable people? Every single time. Right? That's me. Now I want you to know, like, this paragraph is really good news, but there's something about our brains, like I think as human beings, we see the negative and we grab the negative, where it's like, rarely have we seen a person fail. We just like, people fail. Not rarely. It would be rare to see someone fail who has thoroughly followed our path. What is our path? These 12 steps across the page, 59, taken out of this book. And then we see where it says those who cannot or will not recover, those people who don't recover. And it's like, oh, that must be me. No, it's people who can't or won't do this, give themselves fully to these steps. It's not a moral thing. Oftentimes, I don't know that this is what I have to do. I don't know, right? I come and I hear all these suggestions, or I hope I don't have to do them, and I got to try other things first. And it talks about how there are those two who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders. And see, that's what I'm tying in on 114. See, if we read 114 at every meeting, that would be weird. That would be a weird thing to do at every meeting. But if we read 114, I have a feeling we think, hey, that's me. Man, I got these outside issues. My alcoholism or my addiction is complicated with all these other things, right? And I can look here and it says, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. What am I talking about when we talk about honesty? Yeah, it helps to have some of that cash register honesty. It helps if I'm no longer stealing, and it helps if I'm, no longer doing some of those shady things. But the honesty that we're talking about is the honesty to see the hopelessness of my condition and to say I need help. The honesty to be open to the idea that there could be a power greater than myself. The honesty to dive into a 4th step. The honesty to share that stuff with others. The honesty to go out and make amends and continue this way of life. That honesty. that honesty. And little by little, and it doesn't take long, but one step at a time, we get there. And so one of the things I always want to point out is when we talk about, like, man, am I constitutionally incapable? Am I one of those people? Constitutional incapability or a grave issue or like this, all these complications cannot be the mental obsession. See, if I'm here today and I have relapsed, and I've relapsed more than once, and maybe I've been in and out of this thing for years and I can't seem to get this thing, man, maybe I'm one of those people. No, the mental obsession is a symptom of our illness. Relapsing is not a sign, an inherent sign that I'm constitutionally incapable of grasping this thing. What do I need to do? Dive into these steps in this way of life. If I'm relapsing, that's what I got to do. That's it. That's it. These steps taken out of this book to produce a spiritual experience. You know, and one of my favorite, I'm sorry, I'm going to bounce this around again. I wasn't even planning. But if we pop over to the doctor's opinion, if we pop over to page XXI, the very, very bottom paragraph of the doctor's opinion, XX, triple X, and then an I. If we pop down there, and what we're talking about is I call him my homie. He's not alive, so he doesn't have a say in that. So maybe I shouldn't call him my homie, but I love Fitzmayo, Fitzmayo. And if you want to read more about him, his story is our Southern friend. And I love him because he was the first guy in the book that I related to, where I was like, oh, I've done that. I felt that way. And that very bottom paragraph on page XXI is talking about Fitzmayo. It says his alcoholic problem was so complex. So if I think, you know, my situation, just like on page 114, it's so complex, it's so complicated. And it says his depression so great. So some of those outside things, right? And I know what that's like. I've got some of those outside things. It said we felt that his only hope would be through what we then called moral. Fitzmayo, yeah. Thank you for putting the page in the chat. So appreciated. I just saw Fitz in all caps, and I'm like, what's the Fitz? See, it doesn't take much to get me on a tangent. We thought his only hope would be through what we then called moral psychology. The moral psychology they're referring to is the 12 steps to have a spiritual experience. And it says, and we doubted if even that would have any effect. Dr. Silkworth, Bill W., some of these early people, they're like, well, man, Fitzmayo, he is so messed up. His problems are so great. He's so complicated. I don't know. Let's throw these 12 steps at him. And I don't even know if that'll help, right? So if I think I'm different, if I think, man, I don't know if this thing could help me, I'm always reminded of Fitzmayo. And we can turn the page. And it says, however, he did become sold on the ideas contained in this book. What that means is he worked the steps. That's the ideas contained in this book. He worked them. That's how he became sold. And it says he has not had a drink for a great many years. That permanent sobriety. I see him now and then, and he's as fine a specimen of manhood, of humanity, as one could wish to meet. And that is what a spiritual experience or spiritual awakening looks like to those people around us. You know, they get to see that we become these people that we always and truly wanted to be. And so that's my doctor's opinion tangent. So welcome. I'm glad you joined. We're going to pop back over to page 114. Just a whole lot of bouncing around in the chapter 2 was. So what we were talking about was, you know, sometimes, you know, we have this type 4 alcoholic. It's bad. Their alcoholism is bad. We can see that quite clearly that they are hopeless. And their alcoholism might be complicated by other disorders. And what we said, where we left off was it said, in any event, try to have your husband read this book. Offer this solution. His reaction may be one of enthusiasm. If he's already committed to an institution, but convince you and your doctor that he means business, give him a chance to try our method. And it's that idea, that theme that we see. Do you want what we have, and are you willing to go to any length to get it? That same idea where we ask, hey, do you want this thing? Do you want what we have, and are you willing to dive into this way of life? So, and it does say, unless the doctor thinks his mental condition too dangerous or abnormal. And there's humility in that. Like we're saying, we have an answer, but we're going to respect the opinions of medical professionals. It says we make this recommendation with some confidence. For years, we've been working with alcoholics committed to institutions. Since this book was first published, AA has released thousands of alcoholics from asylums and hospitals of every kind. The majority have never returned. And this is a promise. The power of God goes deep. That is powerful. And see, that's the thing. If I miss some of this stuff, if I'm like, later chapters, 2 wives, I'm not a wife, never had a wife, that doesn't apply to me. I miss lines like that. The power of God goes deep. And that has been my experience. The power of God working in my life has worked in areas of my life that I didn't think these 12 steps could touch. I didn't think anything could touch. Defects of character that I thought were so ingrained that they were who I am fall from me. You know, the power of God goes deep. Never, in my experience, I have your own experience, but I never sell the power of God short. We got power, capital B power that we're after. Anyway, sorry, it says, I get excited and then I'll just go on a whole tangent about that whole line. Focus page, focus. So it says perhaps, or you may have the reverse situation on your hands. Perhaps you have a husband who is at large, but who should be committed. Now, it's an interesting thing because rarely do I find it useful to contextualize this chapter, especially this chapter in the time it was written. Rarely is it helpful to try to look through this chapter of the lens of, a housewife in the 1930s. I find that brings far more prejudice than anything else. Again, this is to an unhealed, untreated codependent who isn't able to leave. Just like I'm not able to leave it alone and not take that first drink. But in this case, we kind of if anyone here is married, you might have wanted to have your spouse committed to an institution. You might have been like, oh, that'd be nice. I could use a breather. But we can't really do that, in sort of modern times. And that might be a good thing, that might be a blessing. And hold on, keep coming back, because next week we'll get into the directions on how to make it so we can live with our spouse and partner and won't want to toss them into an institution. So we got those directions coming up. Yeah. Or today, if I go quickly enough, who knows where I'll end up in this big book study. But there are people who are essentially committed to institutions. We have people from all over the world, but sometimes when you're a danger to yourself or others, the government, the police, the authorities can say you have to be locked up and held in a psychiatric unit until you're safe to go. Or if we have committed crimes, and then I'm held in a jail or a prison, right? Those are examples. Now, it's not our spouse putting us there, but it's the police or that sort of thing. And that's what we're talking about. We don't have institutions in the same way they did in the 1930s. But there are times when, honestly, sometimes the consequences of our actions are what we need. And we do need to see and to face the consequences of our actions to come to the end of ourselves. So it says some men cannot or will not get over alcoholism. And what I want you to know is if you're here today, you're willing to listen to this little Canadian ginger natter on about the chapter 2 wives. What I want you to know is you have the capacity to recover. You do. You have enough honesty to show up to this thing and listen to me. Oh yeah, you got willingness abounds. I promise you, you can recover. So that does not apply to you. So it says, when they become too dangerous, we think the kind thing is to lock them up. But of course, a good doctor should always be consulted. The wives and children of such men suffer horribly, but not more than the men themselves. it was one of those things. I remember being fairly kind of new and seeing that line, and I was like, man, I don't know if that's true. Because when I'm in pain, even for a moment, I can get a brief relief, even a moment, from that drink. But the family, they don't have that same relief. But I also know the symptoms and the consequences, right? Just they pile up on us, and there's a shame that comes from being the alcoholic. Now, that's a contentious sentence. Ask Al-Anon. Yeah, I would imagine so. Yeah, and I won't bring it up to the Al-Anons, but I get it. Like, I get it, because it's like I get to try to get a moment of relief from what? From a drink or a drug. Now, where does the untreated Al-Anon try to get their moment of relief? From a moment of control, a moment of helping, a moment of influencing. So maybe that's a way to neutralize the, I don't know, trying to take the sting out of it. Doing my best. Oh. But one of the things I will say, sometimes we read this chapter and we think, man, it's telling these, people to stay with these jerks of alcoholics. And no, now we're going to come up to the second time, at least the second time, where it suggests that we leave. Now, keep in mind, I can't leave on my own power. I need, just in my experience as an alcoholic, as an addict, as somebody who definitely qualifies and has worked some steps in Al-Anon, and is absolutely codependent, I can't leave on my own power. If somebody's like, just break up with him, that's like, just don't drink. You know what I mean? Like, I can't. I need a power greater than myself to work through me for that to be an option. And so this is the suggestion about leaving. So it says, but sometimes you must start life anew. We know women who have done it. If women adopt a spiritual way of life, their road will be smoother. It ties into what we read on page 97, right? If on page 97, it talks about how if we're working with an alcoholic and the alcoholic doesn't want to get well, offer this way of life to the family. And if the family practices these spiritual principles, these 12 steps, there's a much better chance that the head of the house, the alcoholic, will recover. And so that's that idea. So a number of times in the chapter, Two Wives, it's saying, work the steps myself. If I'm picking up this book for whatever reason, work these steps. And as we get into the suggestions for just how to navigate, living with somebody, how to navigate being in a marriage or being in a partnership, what I will actively point out is if we are reading the book, we are the ones with the tools. And unfortunately, it will be our responsibility to use them. So we don't get the cop out by saying, no, I'm the alcoholic. That's for the spouse. No, it's for us too. So, all right. And now what we transition to is something I think that many of us can relate to, whether we relate to codependency, whether we relate to being affected by the illness of alcoholism or addiction in others. It's that fear of what people think. And I relate to that, being consumed with what I think people are thinking about me, right? And so it says, if your husband is a drinker, you probably worry over what other people are thinking, and you hate to meet your friends. You draw more and more into yourself, and you think that everyone is talking about conditions at your home. Now, I know we got some alcoholics, we got some addicts. Regardless of who you are, can we relate to that? That fear that people are talking about me, that they know about me, and I'm my business is on the lips of everyone in town or everyone at the meeting. I promise, I won't speak to you, but I'll tell you, I'm not that interesting. I'll promise that I'm not that interesting. And if you're willing to go along with me, you might not be that interesting too, It says, you avoid the subject of drinking, even with your own parents. You do not know what to tell the children. When your husband is bad, you become a trembling recluse. So avoiding, right? Isolating, wishing the telephone had never been invented. And that's how we affect others, Right. Again, I don't, we talked more about that earlier on in the chapter, but oftentimes I'll come to the rooms and think, man, I only hurt myself. But I remember, oh God, my poor mother. I don't try to get her to do inventory, I promise, but I remember my poor mother telling me one time about how, when parents run into each other and their kids were in school. Like, she was telling me about how she ran into, some parents, and she told me that how she would do. It's like, oh, how's your son doing? Oh, I guess he's at the University of Victoria, blah blah blah. Oh, how's Paige? And she would say, volunteering with the homeless. Now, the truth of the matter is that I was homeless and drinking and using drugs, which is, she really like judged it up a bit, right? But like, which it's funny now, but like, man, at the time, I'm sure it was not funny for her. Listen, I do not have a problem. I'm just a good Samaritan, just really, really helping, just really involved, right? Yeah, we are not a glove lot, absolutely. And that's the thing, like, man, I isolate people. And my mom's not able to say, oh, Paige is, yeah, she wasn't saying, listen, she's pissing her pants drunk, smoking crack behind a dumpster, she wasn't saying that. I mean, to be fair, she didn't know the full extent. So anyway, but it does say we find that most of this embarrassment is unnecessary. While you need not discuss your husband at length, you can quietly let your friends know the nature of his illness. But you must be on guard not to embarrass or harm your husband. And so what it's talking about is something that I find just helpful. And it's a principle I just call it transparency. And it's, so-and-so is struggling right now. We don't have to give the nature of their details of what's going on with them, but to explain that it is an illness. It is not a moral deficiency. They're not bad. They're not sinful. They're not shameful. No, they're just really unwell. They're dealing with an illness over which they could have no power. And it just takes the air out of it. It takes that shame out of it. And it's just a helpful principle. I find it helpful when I'm working with sponsees. I had a couple really rough months where I was dealing with some traumatic grief, and I'd sit down with my sponsees and I would say, hey, just so you know, I'm having a bit of a rough time, and it has nothing to do with you. I just want to acknowledge it because we're sensitive people and we're going to think it's about us, And there's times I'll sit down with people, might seem weird, but I'm like, hey, just so you know, I have a migraine, things like that, where I'm just being transparent. Now, I don't have to dump my problems on my sponsees, but that transparency. And we got a thing in the chat where it's, so my wife told friends who asked how I was, that I was helping support people with social issues. What she meant was that I was holding up drunks who were holding me so we didn't fall over. Yeah. Listen, I'm just, there's going to be a point where we get into Dr. Bob's nightmare, and he's going to talk about how he was like, and then I got well organized by noon. Listen, she's just getting really organized. Later on in A Vision for You, it'll talk about being boiled as an owl. She's just really into birds, all those lies. And don't you worry, we're gonna come to the point where it says don't lie. So don't lie, Yeah, we don't have to enable. We don't have to say, listen, they're really leaning on each other, Yeah. All right. So it says, when you have carefully explained to such people that he is a sick person, you will have created a new atmosphere. Barriers which have sprung up between you and your friends will disappear with the growth of sympathetic understanding. You'll no longer be self-conscious or feel that you must apologize as though your husband were a weak character. He may be anything but that. Your new courage, good nature, and lack of self-consciousness will do wonders for you socially. See, it's hard for me to feel that humility. And when I say that humility, that I'm no better than you, that I'm no worse than you, that we're equals. I can't feel that when I'm holding on to that secret, when I'm holding on to that shame. And actually, let's pop over to page 73. Well, we're going to talk about page 73, and we're going to read the first full paragraph where it says more than most people, right? So page 73, first full paragraph. It's right after the Missy Elliott promises. For those of you who have been coming to this big book study a while, Missy Elliott promises. It says, more than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. He is very much the actor. To the outer world, he presents his stage character. This is the one he likes his fellows to see. He wants to enjoy a certain reputation, but knows in his heart he doesn't deserve it. Just like the family members. No, everything's okay. No, I don't want you to see that we're struggling. I don't want you to see there's alcoholism in this home. I want to keep this reputation, but we know there's stuff going on behind us. And it says the inconsistency is made worse by the things he does on his sprees. Coming to his senses, he is revolted at certain episodes he vaguely remembers. These memories are a nightmare. He trembles to think somebody might have observed him. As fast as he can, he pushes these memories far inside himself. He hopes they will never see the light of day. He is under constant fear and tension, and that makes for more drinking. And so what's the solution? Well, it's that, to do that fifth step, to share the exact nature of my wrongs, to share that inventory with God and another human being. And so when we pop back to page 115, it's those things that grow in the dark, that shame, that black mold that grows. When I let another human being in, and when I let God's light in, man, there is freedom. Those actual step 5 promises, not the Missy Elliott ones that I point to, right? And so back on 115, the result of just being honest, just being transparent, is new courage, good nature, and a lack of self-consciousness. See, my problem is self-centeredness. I'm centered on me, and I'm worried about what people are thinking about me. Self-centeredness is almost never, I'm so great and everybody loves me. It almost is always, I'm awful and everyone sees it. So it says the same, back on 115, the same principle applies in dealing with the children. Unless they actually need protection from their father, it's best not to take sides in any argument he has with them while drinking. Use your energies to promote a better understanding all around. Then that terrible tension which grips the home of every problem drinker will be lessened. And that is the tension. It's important for me to remember I create that tension. That's me. But what do I need to do? Seek to understand rather than to be understood. That same principle we saw in working with others. And also one of the things that, I don't know, I'm sure you guys have never had this pattern in your inventory, but my inventory, one of the things that I found quite often is I would often have to have a villain, and it's their fault and they're wrong, and I could scapegoat them so that I could be the victim, right? And I'm sure you guys don't relate, but I think that's what it's referring to when it's talking about don't take sides, right? It's easy to throw somebody under the bus to get that sense of I feel better than. And this is where it's saying, hey, don't tell, people that they're just into bird watching or they're what was it? Supporting people with social issues. No, it's telling us to be honest, right? So frequently you felt obliged to tell your husband's employer and his friends that he was sick when as a matter of fact he was tight. That means drunk for anyone that's not sure. Avoid answering these inquiries as much as you can. Whenever possible, let your husband explain. So I'm not there to enable, I'm not there to lie, I'm not there to cover up. See, if I have to face the consequences of my own actions, I'm more likely to see the hopelessness of my condition and more likely to be open to a change. And it says your desire to protect him should not cause you to lie to people when they have a right to know where he is and what he is doing. So that honesty, we're not covering up for people. And that's not easy. That's not easy. It's like, how it's hard for me not to lie about my drinking? It's probably just as hard for the Al-Anon to not lie about my drinking, right? And it says, discuss this with him when he is sober and in good spirits. Again, tact and discernment. Pick a good time. Don't, somebody's feeling like crap. Don't be like, hey, your boss called and I had to lie to him and I'm not doing that. No, pick the time. Pick the time. And it says, ask him what you should do if he places you in such a position again. But be careful not to be resentful about the last time he did so. And so what it looks like is, listen, I'm not comfortable lying for you again. And it's absolutely okay. You do what you need to do. But the next time your boss calls, would it be better if I just tell them that you'll call them back? How would you have me handle it, knowing that I'm not going to be comfortable lying? Just something like that. Not you're wrong, you're bad. How should we deal with this going forward? And here's again where it talks about the hopelessness. The more hopeless I am, the better. So letting me hit the consequences of my alcoholism, my addiction. It says there is another paralyzing fear. You may be afraid your husband will lose his position. You are thinking of the disgrace and hard times which will befall you and the children. It says this experience may come to you, or it may have already, or you may already have had it several times. Should it happen again, regard it in a different light. Maybe it will prove a blessing. See, I've found, again, maybe you guys, your launchway into spiritual awakening is gentler than mine, but it's only coming to the end of myself. It's only after having my ass handed to me by my alcoholism, by my defects, by abstinence, that I get, and not getting my way. Those are the conditions that breed that hopelessness so that I'm able to have that spiritual experience. And when we talk about the different types of drinkers, keep in mind, what's the difference between drinker number 2 and drinker number 3 and drinker number 4? It's the severity of the consequences. And we notice that dealing with drinker number 2, okay, let's have them read this book, but we got to maybe approach it kind of delicately. Number 3, we've struck oil, right? So the more I experience the consequences of my actions, the more I may be able to be open to this solution. We can ask ourselves, how often did I come and say, listen, no, I still got a job. I did not. I still got a relationship. It was a hostage situation. I still got money in the bank. No, I did not. I still got this. I still got that. I'm still managing this. But it was only when we started to lose those things. And often for me, it was a lot of the internal things that I started to lose, was I being able to be open. So honestly, there are times, when people relapse and go out and they're like, oh man, they lost their job. And it's good. It's a weird thing, but when somebody relapses, often it's like, man, I hope it gets really bad really quickly so that they can come back and dive in. I think, one of the worst things for somebody like me is if it's kind of bad for a long time, because then I'm living in that agony, and I can be kind of bad for a long time sober, living in that untreated alcoholism and just miserable. So it talks about how this may prove a blessing. It may convince your husband he wants to stop drinking forever. And now you know that he can stop if he will. Time after time, this apparent calamity. And remember, when we spoke about calamity, now keep in mind, I will stub my toe. I don't stub my toe often anymore, actually, but I will stub my toe. That's a wheelchair joke. I will stub my toe. And I'll be like, it's a calamity. I will take a Tuesday afternoon and just turn it into a calamity. But calamities are what it's a Fitzmayo heavy day. Fitzmayo experienced in his family heavy things like losing a job, losing loved ones. He spoke about fatal illness, suicide in his immediate family, calamity, those bad things. It may be a boon to us, and a boon is a helpful thing. So the worst things that happen to us, man, and we're going to see that when we get into the family afterward. If I haven't sold you on 2 wives, I don't got to do any selling on the family afterward. It's just rad. But we're going to see how the dark past becomes my principal asset. And it says, for it opened up a path which led to the discovery of God. See, only coming to the end of myself, the end of my abilities, my good ideas, my plans and designs, drunk or sober, coming to the end, experience calamity after calamity. Does it open up that path? That path is the willingness to work these steps. These steps are the path to the God of my understanding, taken as a way of life. And I'm got some good news and some bad news, and it's the same. I'm never done. I'm never done. I get to continue on this path, continue on this journey, and continue to seek. And when we're on the path, that's good news, right? There's more. I get to have those deeper experiences of God. I get to continue to seek. If I'm struggling right now, or if I've been off the path a little while, that sounds like bad news. Oh man, I got to do it forever. But I promise, it does not take long to get well. And actually, that was my natural stopping point, because where we're going to transition into is the importance of working these steps, regardless of who I am. If I'm reading this book, I got to work these steps. So that's where we'll pick up next week and continue on and wrap up the chapter 2 wives, which again, I want to thank you guys so much. It's really a dream for me able to do this. So thank you. I'll stop the recording and unmute everyone.